Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today I have two people, actually, and it's going to do something special. We're not actually doing a replay, or is it a rematch? I have no idea. Let's do a replay, because replay sounds better than rematch, because rematch sounds a bit competitive. Anyway, I have two people that I met at a recent event. They are Andrea Prazakova and David Boucher. I'll let them introduce themselves. But first of all, let me just say, hi, Andrea. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Adrian. I'm really
Doing
great.
well.
Thank you for having me.
Doing great. Thanks, Adrian.
So, Andrea and David, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, I wonder if you can, Andrea, why don't you go first? Introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about kind of you, about what you do, where you're calling in from. He says, doing air quotes on an audio kind of like show, which is kind of ridiculous. Anyway, tell us kind of about, fill us in, Andrea. Give us a thumbnail sketch on yourself.
Okay. So once again, thank you so much for having me, Adrian. I maybe start with this telling you how I fell in love with CX. So I fell in love with CX in around 2000. I was a head of sales and channel development and service quality for Raiffeisen International, managing 11 markets. And at the time, we looked really, really deeply in how to make the experience of customers better in the branches to start with. And we completely eliminated, our receptions, and we introduced a concept of meet and greeter, and being on the floor and actually experiencing it and being able to involve employees to self-assess and observe it and do mystery shopping really got me interested. And that's where my heart started to pump, and it didn't stop since. Fast forward 22 years almost, I am head of foundry for EMEA for MasterCard. What does it stand for? So it's a place where we run innovation for MasterCard for Middle East and Africa, and it covers also customer experience and insight. I'm Czech by origin, and about myself, I'm married to a South African, have two beautiful boys, and I love to cook and I love fashion. And my love for CX goes back 22 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. David, beat that, I guess.
Well, again, Adrian, this is not a match. This is not a competition. So, and in fact, the markets that Andrea and I both operate in are complementary in many ways. But so by way of background, my name is David Boucher. I'm actually I'm a French verb,
Sorry, sir.
as opposed to a noun. So I've been in healthcare for 43 years now. I have a severe case of wanderlust that I'm not looking for a cure. So I've been fascinated with commerce all my life, how people buy things, how people make money, how people spend money. I currently serve as the Chief of Service Excellence at the corporate level for Aster DM Healthcare. We're a hospital chain based in Dubai, 27 hospitals, half in GCC or the Middle East, the other half in India, about 300 clinics and pharmacies around the world as well. So, dating back to my early days in healthcare, I stumbled on what's now known, I think, as disruptive innovation in healthcare, because I've been curious most of my life. I just had the ability or the penchant, if you will, to basically look at things the way they're being done and goes, geez, there must be a better way to do this from a service perspective and everything else. And then, that's it. So in much of my career, I've led turnaround situations. So turnaround hospitals that were on death's doorstep, if you will. And at that point, when you don't have a lot of money on marketing, and you're 3, 4, 5 months away from bankruptcy, if you will, you've got to. Improving service is about the only thing you can do that's really low cost, that will really drive the stickiness. It will really drive patient satisfaction and your revenue and everything else. So I've been in this space for years, and I've been with Astra now for only about 1 year, and having a ball. So thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much, David, and apologies for mispronouncing your name, Mr. Boucher.
No worries. Yeah.
Anyway. So we met when I was facilitating a panel that was part of the, let me remember now, CX NXT Summit. Big shout out to the Martech Vibe people who organized that. Now that was hosted on the 15th of November of this year. And we were discussing experience and loyalty. And now the thing that struck me, given that, is that, David, you're in healthcare, and Andrea, you're in, I guess, financial services, come sort of technology systems, as it were. And those things couldn't be kind of like further apart in many ways, if you think about this sort of the economic sort of spectrum. And I thought that was kind of a fascinating discussion, because we were talking about experience and loyalty. And we started by actually thinking about exploring this idea, experience and loyalty. But we started off by thinking about kind of like, how does a good CX strategy help in generating better loyalty and retention and things. And I wondered if we could almost like revisit sort of that. David, let me come to you can like first and kind of go, because loyalty is an interesting one for healthcare. I mean, it's kind of like, they feel like odd bedfellows in many ways. So can you help me understand kind of the what does experience and strategy and loyalty kind of mean to Astra DM when it comes to healthcare?
Well, I think for most healthcare providers, Adrian, it's like other businesses, other retail types of businesses, that it costs much less to retain a customer than it does to create a new one, right? So I think that a great customer experience actually creates the emotional stickiness, if you will, that dramatically increases the loyalty and retention. And our tagline, our motto here is "We'll treat you well," and it's more than just letters on a wall, if you will. I mean, we really want all 21,000 Astarians, our employees, to really understand that we need to be looking for ways to go the extra mile to create that emotional stickiness, if you will, that loyalty with customers. Patients today have a lot of, in most parts of the world, have a number of different, avenues they can seek. We have competition, right? So if we don't continually try to exceed the customer's expectation, to meet their needs and exceed their expectations, consumers really can go elsewhere. So I think that the whole customer experience, a great customer experience, really is the mortar, if you will, that helps all the bricks. We can have great doctors, great technology, great buildings, great trained staff and everything else. But if they're not engaged from a service perspective, I think we're missing a lot. And so I kind of refer to it to myself as really the mortar that kind of holds that all to take together. And I think it makes the whole wall, it makes the whole presentation, the whole product and service, if you will, exponentially stronger for the consumer. And interesting. And although we are in different markets than MasterCard, increasingly patients pay by credit cards. Increasingly, we offer telemedicine, which is online. It's direct to consumer, and you pay with a credit card or debit card. And so, I'm 100% confident that Andrea's product is routinely used 365 days a year at where we are right now. So we're always looking for ways to fuse that a little bit. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so it's a bit like it feels like to me that you're kind of saying that loyalty, because healthcare in your part of the world is a competitive market. There's a number of different providers. And so you're going hard on the almost in-person kind of like contact service kind of aspects of it, because that kind of will drive the emotional connection, the emotional loyalty, and then therefore the differentiation. I mean, Andrea, what does it mean for MasterCard? Because here, that's a very different kind of model, because that's like David's talking about something which is really quite personal, kind of heavy touch. I mean, what does it mean for yourself in your business and MasterCard?
I'm thinking a lot since we met last time. If it's so different, looking at healthcare and technology, and more I think about it, I actually think it isn't, because ultimately you deal with customers, and the customers could be business partners, it could be your employees, or it could be your consumers, your visitors to a hospital, or your card users. So maybe there is not such a big difference. But let me maybe just bring it back. You asked in the beginning, about the CX strategy and then the loyalty. And I just want to maybe demystify, because I think that CX strategy is such a suitcase word, and many companies think that if they hire a head of CX and they put a small team, that the world will change. And I wonder, if you look maybe to start to define what is a good strategy, CX strategy, I think it's offset to say, is it a dream or is it a goal? Tim Ferriss, and his tools of Titans. I love this quote, because ultimately many companies, they still have CX strategy as a dream, not as a goal. And goal is something actionable where you put things inside. And for us, the loyalty definitely plays in 3 places. And I think for David is the same. So he doesn't only have Andreas walking, into a Medcare hospital, but he has the suppliers and he has the investors. So we have experiences of multiple different levels. For MasterCard, we have the partners, so which are the banks, the retailers, the merchants. So this is our B2B relationship. We have the consumers, which is the B2B2C, which is still a little bit tricky for us to influence, but we're trying super hard. And then is the B2E, so our employees. And I love what David said about, the 20,000 fans, and to bring it home, this is something which started with Lady Gaga, who created the Club of Monsters. And I think that we all want to have these positive monsters in our companies who are super obsessed with customer experience, who are obsessed with our partners, our products. And that's, I think, our calling. And that's why we're probably sitting here talking to you, because we obsessed ourselves, so for me, I think the strategy is just a goal. I think that then it's really, what are the action you put into place on these different levels? And a loyalty is super important. And again, I want to build on what David said. David says about emotion, empathy. I think it's critical. And you reverting it in your book is to say, are we becoming robots, which, with all the technology use and hope that it will stick? Or are we actually building on people empathies and feelings and create experiences which are relevant to you? And in that critical moment, in that moment of truth, touch you and delight you, and you will tell everybody rather than being upset, and tell more people when you will tell about your delights. So it is super critical. But I don't think we're actually so different, No,
I think there's a kind of a meta kind of part of it. And I think, so one of my frustrations with things like when people get to loyalty and talk about loyalty and retention and things, it's almost a bit like many people, they can jump into almost like a reductive way of doing it. So we look at loyalty, it's like, oh, it's all about a program or something. We need to do this. And actually, to your point, is you actually have to go higher. The first principles around, it's about strategy and about how you can knit everything sort of together. And I remember seeing a piece of research, crumbs, I think it's from ClickFox or something, kind of like a few years ago. And I think they explained it beautifully. They said they did a piece of research that showed that 90% of all loyalty is explained about what happens in and around 2 points on a customer's journey. And the first part, which is around about 50% of that 90%, was what happens in and around the buying experience for a customer. Do you make them feel good? Do you make it feel right? Do you make it easy? Do you make it feel comfortable? All those different sort of things. And the rest of the 40%, the other 40% of the rest of the 90% was explained by what happens when something goes wrong. Like, how do you respond? Now, that always struck me as being from a psychological perspective, from a very human and emotional perspective, are just a really, really simple kind of way of kind of saying it. You're like going, I'm spending my money with a provider. I want to be right. Make me feel good about my purchase things. But I'm also a human being, and I understand that things go wrong. And I don't like risk and uncertainty and failure and stuff. So I just want somebody to just show up and catch me and save me when things go wrong. If you get those two things right, then at a very, very basic human level, then you build that emotional connection. And that feels like kind of what you're both kind of like saying is like, get it right. And it's not about bells and whistles because you get the foundations right. Is that fair?
Very much so.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. And so, we, as I mentioned the last time the three of us talked, I'd be disingenuous not to say that we are not what we aspire to be in our hospitals and our clinics right now. We're 1 year into a long-term journey. We've got a long way to go. But you're absolutely right. We just, in one of our verticals in India, we have 13 or 14 hospitals in India, clinics, and that's, we started a service wallet project tailored in large part after the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain, right? And every one of their employees, from car valets to housekeepers to dietary people to the manager, can spend up to $2,000 on the spot to recover something that's gone south. And so we've started something very similar. It's only 1,000 rupees, which is about $13.20 US. But it's a start. And historically, we've just started this in the last 3 or 4 months. Historically, when something goes south, something goes wrong, we have a patient then who is, berating one of our staff, and all they could do was look at their shoes. They weren't happy that things didn't go right, but they really were not empowered to do anything. Now they can. Now they can give a free Uber ride home. They can give a free coffee or tea. They can give flowers. There's a few other things, and we'll build that list of things, of giveaways and things like that. And it's really empowered the staff, and we're starting to see some pretty interesting changes. Most interesting of which is the body posture changes of the staff, because all of a sudden their shoulders are coming back, their chins are going out, and they feel, okay, if something doesn't go right, somebody comes up, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're tired of the wait time or whatever it is, they can at least do something about it. And so, we're going down that road. And we're started to do some of that here in Dubai as well. What we try to do is pilot, do a proof of concept, work out the bugs, and then try to leverage best practices across the whole enterprise. And it's not so easy when you've got so many units, but that's, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I love the idea that the Ritz-Carlton thing, because they have that sort of service motto, which is what, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen.
Correct.
And I think it goes back to what you were talking about, Andrea, where you talked about this B to B to C to E. And it's almost a bit like that the employees are like you say, they kind of, David's got a brilliant way of describing it, because you call the Asterians, which sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie or something, which is brilliant. And I'd be slightly jealous if I was working for another brand that kind of didn't have a strap line like that. Like, we call our people Asterians. But I think that's brilliant, and the impact it has on people in terms of engagement and things, because it's almost about showing them, respect. But I think the thing I wanted to also kind of pick up on as well is, like, Andrea, you mentioned, this is a word that's been floating around and people have been calling out for it for a long time, is to talk about empathy, because that's empathy is that thing that drives that emotional connection. And I wanted to understand, how do you kind of drive that? Because I think there's a lot of people that are doing some interesting things in empathy. I talk about this idea that people need to build an empathetic musculature. So they need to think about things holistically, everything from a strategy level all the way down to kind of leadership, people, process, technology, all these different sort of things. Because being more empathetic is not just about going on a training course, right? It's like a whole thing. So how do you build that sort of like empathetic capability, let's call it, in kind of like MasterCard?
I love the question. So, I am a true believer that empathy starts with the employees. Yeah. And to build it means that you really shouldn't build big CX departments. You need to identify in the teams people who are ready to be empathetic. I mean, in the past, we often would create solutions which would be completely disconnected from anything which would fit you or David, how you feel. We would not really know customers. In the last 2 years, and us too, we are in the beginning of the journey. We started a movement which is called customer proximity. And also, so what do we do? Very simple. We have number of employees. So in MIA, we are close to 800. So in MIA, we have within the 800, we have these ambassadors. And these ambassadors serve for multiple purposes. So they go out and interview customers. They go out and test ideas. They go out and onboard their friends and families to collect insights. They serve as consumers themselves when we're looking for insights. They give us feedbacks on designs, on solution, whatever it is. So now we have an army of people within the organization, which are not necessarily part of the CX or foundry organization, but they feel like they are. And you wouldn't believe how it changed. So when we did the first activity about 2 years ago, we had about our employees about 107 interviews, and in 72-hour sprint. So we called for a sprint and say, let's understand how were people impacted by COVID, what do they do about it, what hopes they have, and how we can help. 4 questions. We put up short videos, we got volunteers, and people went out, asked their neighbors, asked their families, asked their friends questions that they never asked them before. They came back and they were like, oh my God, we have to do this much more often. In the 20 minutes, I found out so much about these people. I had no idea they're going through this. And now the product guys who always wanted to outsource everything to the agency, they doing it. We also do something which is called listening in series. So if we need to do something on a bigger scale, we now get with the agencies, we number one, get the raw data, because in the past you would get PPT presentation where much of the data, raw data gets misrepresented and you actually don't have anything inside. So now we get the raw data. Plus we enable our employees, whoever wants to listen to the conversations with the consumers. So when the agency interviews the customers, our employees sit on Zoom or whatever system we're using and they can listen in. So I really think that empathy is key. It's now part of our KPIs. We also started in mid of this year, we started to build gangs. Sorry, it's like a word with negative. It's not nothing. Gangs of New York that has nothing to do with it. But for example, now with evolution of NFTs and gaming, yes.
Okay.
I'm a fan of NFT and crypto, but I have zero idea about gaming. So how should I be able to create any solution? So we call into this universe of these 800 people and say, guys, we are creating a gaming gang and we are creating an NFT gang. Whoever is in love with these type of things, come in. So now we have a gangs for this, and we're running now, as we speak, actually an activity with one of our partners in Saudi, and we have 25 people within the MIA for MasterCard who are gamers and gamers' parents who serve us as help us in co-creation, collect the insights, stepping into customer shoes. Really, I think my message really is companies underestimate dramatically how much power they have in their employees, not only as deliverable, the people who deliver the great service, but as consumers themselves, as an extended arm for research, as an extended arm for testing, and also with knowledge which we maybe not have knowledge about, like in our case, NFT, crypto, as users or gaming.
I'm kind of like applauding on that, because I've always been an advocate for the idea of the power of employees. It strikes me that people talk about, and David, I want to come and get your kind of take on this, but it strikes me that people talk about these new things, and then we always talk about advanced technology and big computers and AI and ML and all these different sort of things, neural networks and things, but we forget that we have a network of biological supercomputers that are sort of networked that work for us, right? But we often don't leverage that. And we don't, to David's point about putting in the service kind of wallet idea,
it's not just about recovery, but it's also about kind of how kind of it helps people pin their shoulders back and give them respect because you're giving them responsibility and you're also accessing their ingenuity as well. But David, I mean, are you doing similar sort of things across kind of your network, or how are you building that sort of empathy and sort of insight idea?
Absolutely. And for the record, Andrea and I we've not prepared behind the scenes for this. But it's uncanny. But you're exactly right, Adrian. And so what I try to impart is the message, and this is the culture change. This is the heavy lifting, right? Mm-hmm. Is that in my opinion, we don't hire employees to work for us at Aster. We hire employees to partner with us on this journey. It truly is. It's a journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. So it's the culture change. So how do we do it? A lot of it's modeling the behavior. I'm actually in my corporate office right now in Dubai. I probably spend on average 3.5 to 4 days a week in the field, in our clinics and our pharmacies and our hospitals in all 7 countries where we operate. I think that's really important. A lot of times, but the key, Andrea mentioned this, the key is in recruiting and hiring. We need to make sure we hire and recruit the correct people to represent our brand. We're just now in one of our other verticals, we're actually starting to do some pre-employment testing to try to measure our employees that they're going to be. They may not be caregivers, right? Because let's face it, most people who go into nursing or go into be a physician or an ultrasonographer or a physical therapist, they tend to be empathetic in a genetic way, if you will. Otherwise, they normally wouldn't have chosen that course of work. And so, but for the frontline, for the patient registration staff, for the housekeepers, for the dietary people, for our phone centers, on and on and on, our security people, we want people that have an affinity for service, that want to be. Not everybody wants to serve other people. It's just like people making collection calls. Some people love doing it. I'm one of them. A lot of people don't like calling people and asking them for money, even though the people owe it, right, for whatever reason. So, yeah. So a lot of it is, we talked earlier about the biggest drivers for loyalty for us. Empathy is by far and away the number one. Empathy, I would say, listening is really important. Listen. We've got to listen to our employees first. We're doing a lot of through SMS, through QR codes, through tablets, a lot of with our patients, our customers and families and things. We just recently finished up about a week ago a corporate-wide employee culture survey. And we haven't seen the results of it yet, but it is confidential. We really wanted our employees, our Asterians, to really weigh in. It's an opportunity. Whatever it is, there's nothing out of bounds. With structured questions, but there's a number of free-form text boxes as well. So I think that's all really important. So I think empathy, listening, a fast response time. Once again, we live in an Insta culture, and Andrea absolutely knows this. If the card boxes don't work quickly, or the app on the phone doesn't work quickly, and people have to stand there for 5 minutes, the whole supply chain gets clogged up. People start queuing up at Starbucks. They can't get through the line. It's the same in healthcare as well. We've got to register patients more timely. The throughput has to improve. And again, so response time, and then service recovery as well. But it really is. I refer to it as the heavy lifting. We've got to be out there. We've got to be modeling the behavior. We have a lot of, I think, education to do with our supervisors, managers, directors, and regional vice presidents and things to make sure that they absolutely understand the 6 core values of the company and what we're all about and everything else. And so, and it is. And again, I think Andrea touched on this, and I'll expound on it a bit, is that I think one of the first things that I have found in my career, the first things to get our employees to innovate is to eliminate the fear from the organization, so that employees can come up with ideas and they won't feel belittled in any way. They won't feel put down. And I think that's where we're starting. And so, when employees come up to me and ask or say first thing in the morning, I have an idea, what about this or that? Even if I really don't think it's going to work, I absolutely value that exchange, and I validate their idea. I'll do some legwork on it and everything else. And, that's so important. And they might be little ideas at the beginning, but that's what leads the way to, a little bit of greater bravado, and bigger ideas down the road. So
David, if I may, I'd like to dig in a little bit and on something you said, and then I'll kind of, and Andrea, want to get your view on this. But you talk about this idea, because you both talked about this idea, this process, you're at the beginning of a journey, and there's a process of change, and kind of changing kind of the culture. That's where the part of the heavy lifting, right? And so I wanted to understand kind of like, what's your perspective around the time it takes to do what sort of time frame are we talking about? Because I also going to know that, because Andrea, you talked about this customer proximity idea, and I think Angel started singing, David, when you talked about kind of you spend 3 or 4 days kind of out in the field and not outside of your office and stuff. And that for me is like that whole customer proximity idea, because you're connecting with your people and the customers and everything else. But I'm just intrigued about the kind of, what's your view on the kind of the arc of change, how the kind of the time frame on it, because that has an impact on leadership, and then, as you say, influencing supervisors, and kind of like, it's like playing that game. That's like a big investment, a long game, as it were. So what sort of time frame are you talking about in terms of how long it's going to take before you expect to see that wholesale sort of change?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. And a difficult one to answer, but it really depends. As you might imagine, Adrian, each of our hospitals has a bit different culture based on the executive who's there managing it, and the 4 or 5 key physicians that are working with them, right? So you've got those relationships, those partnerships. And so, I've seen hospitals turn as quickly as 60 to 90 days. And 1 or 2 of our facilities, we had the right person in the right role at the right time. And we've been able to really move. Our net promoter scores gone up significantly in a relatively short period of time. But we're an aircraft carrier. You can imagine we saw 20 million patients last year in the middle of COVID with 21,000 Asterians. And so it's trying to focus. One of the things I try to do, and again, I've been accused throughout my career of aim, shoot, ready. And I take that as a compliment. It seldomly is meant as one when somebody describes me that way. But and I don't mean taking a chance with clinical. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about from a service perspective. We're almost never ready. The organization is almost never ready. And so we try things, we implement some things, and we do, we evaluate as we go and say, well, that didn't work. Let's tweak it just a little bit and everything else. And so, that's we've got a couple of what I'm trying to do is really focus on 2 or 3 of our particular hospitals that are high visibility. I think financially they're underperforming. And I think a good part of the reason is because their loyalty is not where it needs to be. The patient experience is absolutely not. And the family member, the bystander, that whole experience is not where it needs to be. And so, that's, I think over the course of 9 to 12 months, we'll see some significant change. But one of the secret sauce that I try to always achieve is early wins. I look for things that are high ROI, very low cost. And I know potentially some of our competition here in UAE and India might be listening to your podcast. So I'm not going to give away that secret sauce, but off the record, I'll certainly share some of those things. But we can identify things, look at things, really quick things that we can fix, things that we can do that create a market buzz, if you will. Some little things that are very low cost that we know are going to go viral in social media, because hospitals don't do some of the things that we're in the process of doing. And so that's, the 5-star hotels do it. We're starting to do them as well here in Dubai. And so you look for early wins. What that does is that builds momentum, right? You start to say, okay, you start to see, well, this worked here. And then you have some of our hospital CEOs calling their fellow CEOs saying, look, you guys just moved your NPS, your net promoter score by 18 points in 2 months. What are you doing? Right. And it's that leveraging. I can suggest all day long that we leverage best practices, but I can't change people, places, and things. Right. I believe in the power of attraction rather than promotion. So I can push and try to pull and everything else. But when they start saying, wait, I want what she's having, and to quote When Harry Met Sally, and that's, if they can do that, and then they at the peer level, they've got that energy flowing back and forth. And that's what we're in the process of creating right now. We're making some headway with that. because then you have a lot more, the Asterians, the soldiers, if you will, to quote Andrea. You've got people out there that are really start across verticals and everything. They start communicating with each other much more freely. And so that's one of the things that I try. And I'm new. I'm here only 11 months now. I'm going to play this naive card as long as I can and get as much mileage out of it as I can, because it breaks down barriers. People, they're not going to say, you should know better. Are you stupid? We don't do that in this vertical. And then they're, well, you're new, so I'll give you. So
you've been new for like, what's it now, 40 years or so, kind of now, David?
43 years now. I've been in healthcare.
There you go.
That's right.
It's always new. So Andrea, I mean, what has change look like for you? Because I mean, I guess, is it like a faster kind of pace, or how does it kind of like work for you? Because that whole, because I mean, I'm just interested. We talk about innovation, we talk about change, we talk about these things. We often don't talk about timeframes.
Yeah.
And we also don't talk about timeframes when it comes to how they match up with executive timeframes, like in post sort of things. And that can feel a bit of a conflict as well.
Let me maybe compare it to something and to bring it alive. Yeah. So in my previous career, I was a group head of retail and SME banking for 5 markets in Africa: Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Tanzania, and Mozambique. And it was a startup of a retail bank from zero. There was no money. 2008, Citi was supposed to be the investor. The crash came, so there was no money. So you had to build up something new, similar when you build a CX culture, right? But because you're building a business which generates revenues, the support all around is much bigger. And you can bring money in, you can bring commitments in, and you can go live in, we went live in Zimbabwe with the first branch in 2 years, everything, systems, products. So because, people go see the money coming into the bank. Yes, with CX and loyalty, it's much harder because it's almost like, for many people, fluffy stuff, with experiences. So I look at it personally as a startup. If you start your own business, you also don't start and say, I want to IPO it in 5 years and I want to do this. You do things as they go. And I think the philosophy which me and my team are trying to build on is do now and ask for permission later. And I think David was elaborating on that a little bit as well, is to say do things to create credibility. Lower your ego, have everybody who has the money, give them something which makes them look better. Give them something which will enhance their product. Because, loyalty and customer experience can float somewhere here. And if it's not directly connected and doesn't add value to the people who generate money, it will still remain a dream and not a goal, right? So for us, it took around 2 years here in MIA that we started to turn from the dream to a goal.
Right.
Yeah, because before it was, it's important to have, CX and that, because, you have to have it. You would look bad if you don't have it, right? But now, because we did that, do now and ask for permission later, many projects across the 2 years, which started to add value to different internal stakeholders, the support and the number of supporters, evangelists, and ambassadors grew. So if you put your employees onto it, so not everybody is an evangelist, no? Then you have the ambassadors and then you have the supporters. And now it's getting bigger and bigger because of that. So I really think that it depends on the organization and it depends significantly on the leadership. If you have somebody, I was on the conference 2 weeks ago, and the keynote speaker was a gentleman from Amazon who was head of innovation policy for Amazon globally. And he said one thing. He said the key piece to whatever they did was Jeff Bezos believe in it. And I think that we often underestimate that we might be capable and competent as specialists. But if we come into an organization where the management is not supportive and doesn't believe that this is the thing to do, it will take you 5 years or 10 years. If you have somebody who is almost there, it might take you 2 years. If you have somebody like David who is like, okay, guys, let's do it, it might take you 90 days. Yes, it really depends. And it's an army of people and an army of hearts, which takes to make it happen. But again, it starts with the mindset and with the people who see this as a goal, as something they want to achieve, and they put actions to place.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think I think everything that you've said, and I'll come back to that kind of, you focusing on the employees the idea of building that customer proximity, because it builds the understanding, the feel sort of thing. And then they can start to talk about stuff that they're really knowledgeable about, and because they've got real insight into you. But there's a lot of different kind of like pieces there. But I'm just looking at the time, and I know we could probably kind of rummage around this sort of stuff for ages. But I wanted to ask you some other sort of things, just a kind of bit more broader. But before we can move on from that, around the sort of the experience and loyalty sort of thing, Andrea, is there anything that you'd like to sort of highlight or add that we've missed out around this kind of like topic before we can like move on?
Yeah, I think that there's one point which, maybe for the people who listen to it, they think, oh my God, these people completely ignore technology, and they only talk about people and people and people. And I see, us, including many organizations, think and feel that loyalty and CX will be solved by AI. And I think that if we don't get everybody at Winston, like, Dan Brown wrote in his book, The Origin, which was quantum computing AI assistant, I think we will not get it right. So it will take quite a long time to actually build, something which will be able to feel the empathy, which will be able to program the empathy. So until then, I really believe that, less maybe focus on the technology, because now I think that many companies think that technology is an escape, that they leave the employees and say, now I replace my employees with technology. But if they didn't get the employees right in the first place, the technology will not work either, because you don't understand the entire interaction point. And so I think one of my thinking when I was listening to both of us speaking is to say, really people should not underestimate the power of technology and definitely invest into it in this space, but not move from people. And if they didn't manage it well there, hope that technology will solve for that. And we have many examples in this market and many other markets where it simply didn't work.
David?
Or Adrian, yeah, two things very quickly in 60 seconds or less. One thing, just to defend my sense of urgency around what we're doing. There's a 19-year-old book called "When It's Not the Big That Eat the Small, It's the Fast That Eat the Slow." And I'm just committed to basically quickening a lot of our processes. Our patients wait too long for too many things across the globe, right? So, but one of the things I have found out, and I heard this at a Rotary meeting in the States back probably 10 years ago, Andrea, just for your edification, life and careers, I tend to believe, is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes. And I'm running out of time. We've got to get some things fixed, and we've got a sense of urgency here to do that. And the other thing, just on a similar, we've actually introduced a concept in one of our verticals called Astra Service Ninjas. So a little takeoff on the soldier thing, but you'll see my signature block. I may have emailed one of you. You see a little Astra Ninja out there. Passionate warriors of service excellence. And it's gonna evolve. We don't exactly know what that whole thing's going to turn into, but we're going to have some fun with it. And we know when we get cases every single day, we great stories, that great service that our Asterians have rendered and delivered to customers and stuff. And then I'll send them, rather than an attaboy or attagirl, they get an add a service ninja little sticker. So, anyways, off it goes.
I love the idea that around building in the sort of the social dynamics to all of this sort of stuff. I mean, Andrea, you talked about, the evangelists and the ambassadors and the supporters and stuff. And David, you talked about, service ninjas and things. And I think because it's my experience as well. I've worked on programs. In fact, I'm working on a program right now where I'm in an organization with the idea is to try and develop a culture of service excellence. And one of the things that we've done in that is put together an ambassador network. But whilst you can volunteer for that, you actually have to apply to it as it will. So it's not just a thing. It's like we're trying to make it that it's just not that you can just show up and then you can join up and then you end up with people that are collecting badges. So it's not like being in the scouts or the kind of Girl Guides where you end up with this kind of like an arm full of badges, as it were, because that happens in organizations, right? You get people that are joiners, and we're trying to get to the point where we're trying to make it a thing where we're promoting proactivity within that, and then trying to recognize those people and trying to give them visibility across the organization. And then it shows the value kind of it. And then it's hopefully becomes that, and there's a magnetic attraction to it, and then it becomes infectious and things. So I think kind of what some of the stuff that you're doing sounds brilliant. But because it also kind of like leverages that, some of that social sort of dynamic stuff that kind of goes on. Particularly, David, you were talking about kind of like get one hospital to do something, and then their NPS kind of score goes like this, and then they call the other kind of like, then another hospital CEO calls them and goes like, how the heck can we do that? Tell us how, right? So people don't want to feel left out, right. which is great. But I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and because we talked about the experience and loyalty and empathy, and Andrea, you talked about sort of technology, and that we shouldn't. Technology is not a get out. It's not a panacea. It should be something that fits together with everything. The strategy, right strategy with the people, the process, technology. All these things have to make a complete pie. But of all the stuff that is going on right now, we talked about advanced technology and AI and everything else, and just all these different things that are happening. I mean, what do you think? Let's start with you, Andrea. What does the future of service and experience look like from your kind of like standpoint? And what do you think some of the big challenges are that we're going to have to navigate or, get right in order to succeed?
So I think that talking about digital is not even a question. I think that's a hygiene. So everything is moving obviously to a digital world. So now I think that some of the challenges which I see going forward, especially utilizing obviously AI, going into places like metaverse and so on, it's, how do we use it responsibly, and how do we avoid biases inside? So obviously everybody wants to have personification. You want to see only what is relevant to you, only through the channels which are relevant to you, and only in the point in time which is relevant to you. And that obviously can be all arranged through different utilization, different kind of technology, which, as you rightly said, it's just an enabler, right? It's not the solution. It's just enabling you what you do. So one of the pieces inside is to say, how do we use it responsibly? So in our case, are we using it to make you overspend and just to top up your limits and to do, so in banking and payment industry, how do you make sure that you save customer time, you save them money, you add value to them, and you really give them only what they need? So I think in terms of the AI, it's really important that we avoid the biases, because it's fed with information from the past and it's fed by our own behavior. So how do we bring that policing inside that, we don't bring biases from the past, if it's religious, if it is racial, if it is gender biases, because the computer in the beginning doesn't know, right? Because it's not a human, he or she cannot distinguish. So I think that's one of the challenges which we have. I think that the technology which we have currently is absolutely amazing. Where it is going is amazing. If you look, the newest technology which is now here already, metaverse, NFTs, cryptos, I think it's unbelievable what you can do with it, how you can use it. But use it responsibly, understand it, and avoid the biases, I think will be our biggest challenge. And the second piece is making sure that you build for negative scenarios. So when I give you something, you spoke about it in the beginning, you're super happy, you got this beautiful metal card, it feels good, you go on your shopping, and now you're going to your holidays to Morocco, something happens, and you need to be airlifted to a hospital of David. If you even don't know that the card offers you an insurance which can send you a helicopter and brings you to the hospital, takes care about everything, and transports your family back home, you would never know that this product offers you such a great value, right? So how do we make sure that you and David and all the customers who hold cards like this know that if anything happens, we have you covered, and you just go on a chat or phone a number and we lift you back. So these negative experiences and negative scenarios are really important.
Can I just say, I don't know if it was MasterCard, but I'm going to let MasterCard take credit for it, given what you've just said. My mother and father were visiting my brother in New York a number of years ago when he was living there, and just flew in. And in the middle of the night after they kind of flew in, they were staying with my brother. My father kind of like woke up and he had a tight chest, and they had to call the ambulance. He got whisked to kind of Brooklyn kind of General, and then as soon as they found out that they booked their flights with the credit card and they were kind of got the medical insurance, they got whisked away to a fancy clinic in Manhattan. I think it was a Carnegie something. Anyway, he was there for about 4 or 5 days. It was like 5-star treatment, blah, blah, blah. And it was quite a serious incident. And they were lucky that they were literally around the corner from Brooklyn General. They got such speedy kind of, they got the medical services kind of arrived so quickly, but then the level of care was brilliant. So what I can say is like, thank you for that. I don't know kind of who exactly was responsible, but that's fine. But thank you both of you for being able to be part of that sort of whole thing. But that was a bit of a random tangent, but never mind. David,
yeah,
kind of like future. What does it look like? Key challenges, all those sort of things.
Sure. Well, I don't think it was random at all. I think it was absolutely germane. And what we tried to do with our 3 children is to, anytime like travel plans, you mentioned going on, holiday and everything else. I'm surprised at how many adults we explain this to. Always try to make your reservations on a credit card. Use your MasterCard to make the reservations. And they'll say, well, why? I'll use my debit card. Well, if you use your debit card, you can't dispute anything, right? Possession is 9/10 of the law, as we would say in the US. So the vendor, the merchant, has your money. Good luck getting it back. Whereas you have a credit card, you at least have a multi-billion-dollar company who's supporting you. So we insured all of our 3 grown children now that they do that. When possible, always use your credit card. Pay it off every month sorry, Andrea, we don't believe in service fees in our house, but pay it off when you get your statement every month on your phone and call it there. So I think, when I hear about AI and where healthcare is going, the first 2 things that always come to my mind, number one, between 3 vendors, 3 merchants. So you look at GE, General Electric, Philips, and Siemens. They have truly tens of billions, hundreds of billions of images. And I'm saying this as a layperson. I'm not a physician, don't want to be, and no buyer's remorse in my career. It's worked out pretty well. But, I think we have a desperate need across the globe. You mentioned your fundraiser with patients, or not, with Doctors Beyond Borders. And so, we have huge primary care, secondary care needs that, I think that easily probably 90 to 95% of all images, quite frankly, it's not really artificial. We call it AI, but it's really not. We've got history. We've got actual anecdotal, that yes, your bone is broken, or there's a shadow here, it might be something. Then we want to have a board certified radiologist take a look at that, or we might need to do a biopsy or whatever it might be. That's number one. I'm not saying we don't need the physicians. I'm just saying it's probably not a resource well spent. And I see us globally looking at maybe that change, and maybe the pandemic has done something to accelerate that. And again, the next thing that comes to mind is there are actually now in service. I know there's a couple of hospitals in Scotland that use these bedside nursing avatars. Now, right. I'm not a fan of that. And I'll share my age. When I'm in hospice, when I'm on my deathbed, I want my nurse on one side and my wife on one side, my nurse on another. And if there's a final plunge of morphine to be given, I don't want an avatar to be instructing me how to do it myself. I literally don't. That's not. I've grown up and spent my whole career around empathy, around nurses and doctors and everything else. And so I just, again, full disclosure, I didn't grow up with my thumbs like that. And maybe younger people, maybe young folks today, people under 40 are attracted to that kind of care. I'm not. And so those are my 2 anecdotes on AI. But
David, I think that would be just weird. The idea of kind of being alone, it feels like I'm really kind of like, or comforted by something which is not human. Maybe I just have a similar sensibility, but Andrea's kind of like, is kind of waving and wants to jump in. So Andrea, what do you want to say?
I really love what David was saying around that's not for him, and also he mentioned in the beginning that he is born being curious, and I love that. And I think that we, despite the ages we have, so I will be 49, and I rarely can associate with people who are 20. And I think one of the challenges which we have in our jobs and people who are in similar ages in our jobs in this era is, how do you solutionize for future consumers? Because they grew up differently, they see things differently. And I think the Generation Z and Generation Y is such a massive amount of population. So I think another challenge besides of the technology, which really came up to my mind, is to say, how do we create solutions which are relevant for people which grew up in a very different world. Yes, and how do we bring in people into our teams who understand these worlds, so that whatever we put in place today is not irrelevant in 5 years, because the people who will be relevant for will just not be there anymore, and the new generation would just say, what is this? This is so old fashioned. I want it differently. So I think that's one more challenge, which I think we need to just, think through and live with.
And I think I couldn't agree more with you, Andrea. But what I would do is I would add a note of caution and potentially challenge to that, because I think there's also a danger that we end up making big assumptions around what Gen Z or Gen Y or kind of what the next generation is going to be, because they're living up in a very much a digital first metaverse, blah, blah, blah sort of environment, and that they're fundamentally kind of different in terms of their preferences. Now, they might be at a broad generic sort of thing, but I think we need to also be cautious about how people respond under pressure situations.
Right.
Because it's like, I remember seeing research from years ago, which was in financial services, about young people and how they respond to what they want when it comes to financial services. And particularly it was to do with kind of insurance that was complicated, like almost like big decision, life insurance choices. And when faced with taking a big decision and even having all these digital options around them, actually the majority of these younger people were like going, actually, I still want to talk to somebody.
No, definitely. I think in critical pieces, in the negative scenarios and the scenarios of fear that it is. And I think one of the areas which we need, which is also a solution, is how can you co-create with your young generation? So not making anything out of assumption. I think that was definitely not a message I wanted to send.
No.
Invite them in.
Yeah, my point was I think we just need to add a note of caution that says, please don't make assumptions about your customers. Because I think the idea of this is this world of kind of personalization. Everybody wants a personalized experience. Everybody wants to be treated as an individual human being, right? And they want stuff that kind of makes sense for them. However, the research shows that whilst customers say they want it and brands say they want to deliver it, actually, many brands are not getting it right. They're almost like missing the target. Because what the research is surfacing is this idea that we agree it's important, but we don't have a shared understanding of what it means. And almost going back to what we were saying before, this idea about customer proximity. David, you've been out in the kind of the field. Sometimes we have to go out and seek out and almost pilot and hypothesize what that shared understanding kind of is to achieve that loyalty and retention and personalization that we crave, and also understanding that requires us to do the hard work. It's almost, where are our shoe leather in many kind of ways across the board. But in terms of just kind of wrapping this up, and because I think this is come back to this idea, is it starts with individuals making a difference and changing kind of behaviors. And so, David, if I was to kind of ask you to boil it all down and say, if there's there's a service and experience leader listening into this, or somebody who's an aspiring service leader experience, or somebody who's not, who just wants to make an effective change, and they want to drive increased loyalty and retention in their business, and better service, better experience, just the whole shebang. What would be your best advice to them? What should they do more of?
One word, 3 times. Listen, listen, listen. And I know that's probably not an expected thing to hear from an American north of 60 years of age, a male, by the way. But I mean that. Really listen, listen, listen. Our customers tell us exactly what we need to be doing and what we need to be doing better and what we're doing well. And I think, we need to do a better job at listening. And the information is there. It becomes our strategic plan, if you will, around the whole service excellence journey.
Thank you.
So David just stole the word, so that I will enhance it. So,
David, for everybody listening into this, David's just kind of like stood up and done a lap around his office.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Amazing. But that shows how in sync we are, right? So right. I think really there is listen and be curious and lead by example. I feel that, like David is going to the hospitals. I used to spend 4 days a week in Zimbabwe in the branch, in the back office and looking with the customers and bring your team with you. I think it's super important that you show them how easy it is. And also leading by example, ask your team every day, when was the last time you spoke to a Kareem driver? When was the last time you spoke to an Uber driver? When was the last time you spoke to somebody who served you? How are they? What are they doing? How do they get paid? Or what troubles they are in? Be curious and listen and show that you do it first. I think that's really, really critical. Don't ask your teams to do it if you don't do it. They need to see you doing it. I think, And then, I can dance a little bit too because David did so well.
Adrian, and you used the phrase shoe leather. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. One of the things I've resurrected here at Astor is we all know what an MBA is. Well, what I talk a lot about, and we have in our strategic plan for service, is MBWA, management by walking around, right?
Tom Peters.
Oh, I love it.
Come on.
It's a 30-year-old concept, but that's what I'm trying to encourage my peers to do. Get out of the office. If you're in a hospital, clinics and stuff, get out there and watch your customers, support your employees. And there's no pixie dust that I'm aware of. Maybe AI one day, long after I'm dead, you'll be able to, Samantha will be able to wiggle her nose and have magic happen, but it's really letting our employees know they're supporting, let them know that you're listening to them and that you expect them to listen to the customer. And, oftentimes our employees generally do what we inspect and not what we expect. So if the expectation is that if we want our employees to listen to the customer, we need to be inspecting that. What have you heard? Exactly what Andrea just said. I like to chat Kareem drivers and Uber drivers and taxi drivers. Where are you from? How long have you been here? What do you like? What changes have you seen? What do you think should be changed about Dubai? There's not much. Anyways, it's just, I think that's the shoe leather. I'm going to steal that from you. So thank you for that.
No, that's kind of fine. I mean, I've had Tom Peters on this podcast a couple of times.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Kind of. I'd like to say I know Tom. I don't really know him. I mean, I'm a fan of his work, and he's been on and been incredibly entertaining and gracious and generous with his kind of time and insight. But he's a great guy. I mean, he's been saying the same thing for 40 odd years. But that an intrinsic part of that is that management by wandering about. And in this kind of like world where we're kind of a bit more working remotely, kind of a bit more digitally kind of distant, sometimes physically distant, I think it's just incumbent on people just to not lose sight of that. But actually to go, well, if that's important, but I can't really physically wander about, then how do I transpose that? David, you seem to you've got the luxury that hospitals are still have to be open because they're serving kind of patients. But so you do have that there probably a bit more grace than some others who are still working kind of remotely. But I think the challenge then is to leaders and people that have in positions of responsibility that are trying to drive insight and change in this sort of space is to go, well, management by wandering about, well then, if you're working remotely, how can you wander about? I guess that's the question.
You can't. I mean, if that's a question, right? So you really can't. I can't. I use Teams and Zoom, and I guess Skype's probably still around. But I really, and maybe that's a function of my age and experience. And I think I coach kids in soccer, football for 21 years in my career, and so a lot of what I'm doing is coaching, and I can't do it through Zoom or FaceTime. I'm not able. And it's fine. Any port in a storm for a day or two, but I've got to be out into the centers, into the hospitals, the clinics, the pharmacies, the optic places, and watch the exchange. And you can see things, how we're organized, that we need to do some things differently, or that one center is doing it really, really well, and we need to replicate that where we can. And that's it's that whole emotional thing, the eye contact, the name badge, making sure people have clean uniforms, all of that. It's very challenging to do. I'm not saying impossible, but I'm not the guy to do it that way. I'm old school. So
thank you, David, Andrea. Thank you. we're gonna have to call it kind of there and just go say that's I think that's probably enough, because the people are probably kind of their heads are bursting kind of right now. So, but before we go, I wanted to finish on a little bit of fun, a bit of a distraction, but something I've been doing for the last, nearly 2 years now, probably over 2 years, actually. So since I published Punk CX back in 2019, everybody I've been speaking to on the podcast, I've been asking them two word brand association questions. And the first question I ask is, what one word or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience? And I'm going to do this it's imagine a visual tombola sort of thing. And I'm going to pick up, and the first person I'm going to direct that question is Andrea.
Okay, so I will not give you one, but I will give you one and a quote, to extend your list. So
there you go.
One word is actually from your book, and it's called Gemba.
Hey.
So which means being in the place, and it comes from Japan. I think it beautifully describes everything which we've been talking about for the last hour. I think it's beautiful. Oh, I didn't know that's the writing, but I think it's a massive word. I love it. So it really is described. But for my personal quote is, "Why to fit in if you can stand out," by Dr. Seuss. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and who didn't read Dr. Seuss as a child or as an adult, I think it's a must read, because it gives you a lot to think about. And we really need to always keep in mind that we don't need to fit, because we are all born to stand out.
Awesome. I love that. Dr. Seuss. I'm going to go, watch this. So today he says, reaching for a book. Yay! Which is the Things You Can Think by Dr. Seuss.
Exactly.
I have it on my kind of shelf. I love Dr. Seuss.
And I didn't know that. Huh?
Oh, and I have 2 Dr. Seuss posters up here as well. So
okay.
I'm being a bit of a fanboy. David, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
I can't follow Andrea with any bit of grace. So the label that came, the 2 words that came were disruptive innovation. I think.
Perfect.
Given the brevity.
And thank you for that. I mean, so then, let's kind of come back to you, David. What brand would you say, if I said, what brand do you think epitomizes more of a punk approach to customer experiences? What sort of brand comes to mind?
Sure. Well, in healthcare specifically, I'll just stay focused. 2 actually ideas come to mind. Number 1 is the Mayo Clinic, arguably one of the top best hospitals in the world. And it's their whole team approach to diagnosis and care is pretty well known, yet so few organizations worldwide follow them. It's curious.
Yeah.
And so year after year, 10 years in a row now, the Newsweek top 200 hospitals worldwide. But one other much smaller organization, an American company, Boston-based, named American Well, or Amwell, AMWEL, comes to mind as well. They were one of the early companies in telemedicine back as far as 2006, 2007 timeframe. They're grown, but they've really, they've morphed into something that's much more than direct to consumer. telemedicine. I won't go into a lot of details and everything else, but they were one of the early pioneers. And long before most human beings heard the word pandemic, certainly COVID. So they've been disruptively innovative in a number of different ways.
Awesome. They're two great examples. I mean, I don't know American well, but I know that Mayo Clinic, and because they're just legendary in that sort of patient experience healthcare space. And the interesting thing enough is they give most of their stuff away in terms of how they do things. You can go and do some research around the Mayo Clinic and you'll get all their handbooks, the culture books and everything else. And it's like it's a secret hiding in plain sight.
Right.
And yet you're absolutely right, is people find it really hard to replicate kind of that because they're continuously innovating on the back of it. So brilliant examples. Andrea, what sort of brand would you pick? Do you think that epitomizes that sort of a approach?
I am embarking outside of my industry, and for me, definitely is Tesla. Okay. I think if I look at how they are the punk rockers of car industry and transportation, and going forward, I think that's what they will be. I think they really don't play by rules. I love what they're doing, how they make customer feel, how the car engage. I think it's everything around. It's just amazing. And, but they don't really, I think that they're taking it from other industries, what you like from other industries, and putting it into a car industry. And no other cars so far have been able to make that. And it's beautiful. It's forceful, it's elegant, it's beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight with us today. It's fascinating. And we positioned it that it was like we're coming at it from opposite ends of the spectrum, but actually there's so many similarities because the fundamentals are, the same. It's almost a bit like the difference is how we apply things. So Andrea, David, I just want to say a huge thank you from me, and absolutely wonderful to spend more time with you, again. And, thank you kind of once again for sharing your time and your insight and your experience with us today. That's been ace. So thank you.
You're welcome. It was a highlight of my week. This was really fun.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Great. Thank you.
Okay. See you.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsco.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.